So I'm going to start by reading a sentence from the book that we're discussing tonight, which is The Logbooks by Adam Zmith and Tash Walker. And that sentence goes, "The sound of the phone rang out in the room above Housmans' bookshop at 5:05 p.m. on the 4th of March 1974. That was the phone call that inaugurated London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard. To say that from that moment on Switchboard became a queer institution would be an understatement. It was a lifeline, yes, for many thousands of people struggling with their sexual and gender identities, living through systemic homophobia, the AIDS crisis and the grim shadow of Section 28. But it is also a source for dating advice, a codex on hanky codes, a place whose primary function was to convince sexual dissidents of these isles that theirs was a life worth living and a beautiful one. So we at Housmans, where in our upstairs office that first phone call rang out over 50 years ago, are delighted that Tash Walker and Adam Zmith have put together this incredible and profoundly moving book, which I'm going to show you now. So you can see my battered copy, The Logbooks, published by Faber. The project began when Tash, a veteran switchboard volunteer herself, found a box of call logs in a crawl space at the switchboard offices. The project evolved when she met Adam Zmith and he came on board as a collaborator. What the two authors have done here is not simply to collate an archive, but have weaved from that archival material a profound personal story of solidarity and lost histories. It is a really astonishing achievement, and I'm very proud that we're able to have the two authors with us tonight. And I'd love it if we could give them both a round of applause now. So what's going to happen is this. Tash is going to get up and read her intro, and then Adam's going to get up and read a little bit about from the kind of main introduction to the book, where they talk about Housmans and the history of Switchboard and Housmans. And then I'm going to ask them a few questions that I've got written down, and I'm going to talk to them for maybe kind of 35 to 45 minutes or so. And then we're going to open things up for a kind of open discussion, a sort of Q&A, but we would also like to invite people to share their own history with Switchboard. If anyone in the room has any kind of personal recollections to do with the charity and they were comfortable sharing that, that would be absolutely fantastic. Just so you know, this is all being recorded. If you want to share a recollection but you don't want it to end up on the recording, just come and speak to one of us after the talk and we'll make sure that it doesn't go on the recording. Right, Tash, do you want to get up and read?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Al. That was really lovely to hear. Hello, everyone. Nice to see some friendly faces, including the current chair of Switchboard, Zan, who's there. Come on, I've got to shout you out. It's always important to remember Switchboard's still going over 50 years later, and there will be people on the phones right now. So we're very lucky to still have it. And, of course, to be here at Housmans, where it all began. So this book is quite heavy. So I'm going to do my best to stand and read you an extract, and then I'll pass to Adam. 2014, Tash. I've heard rumours. People are saying there are boxes somewhere, full of fun photographs, protest banners, sexy HIV prevention posters, pages and pages of meeting minutes, and call records. It's all the stuff generated in the running of a helpline that started in 1974, where I am now a volunteer. My role is to listen to anonymous phone calls from people living all over the UK. They ask me a stream of questions about sexuality and gender identity, and in return, I listen in confidence and answer where I can. It's 2014, and Switchboard, the LGBT plus helpline, is approaching its 40th year of operation. I work shifts in the phone room, drinking gallons of tea, wondering what it had been like before. The rumour of those boxes, filled with hidden voices and lost questions, proves too enticing for me to ignore. Switchboard's building has a storage area, but it's more of a crawl space above the common room. I squeeze into it one Saturday afternoon, wedging myself between the water-stained, dust-ridden boxes, folders and files. I find stacks of papers and minutes, photographs of volunteers in chunky sweatshirts, answering phones in the 1970s, and posters stamped with the old gay Switchboard logo in black and white. Tucked behind a folder of pictures, I discover a stash of notepads, each marked with the words logbook. The spine of the first logbook collapsed long ago. Tea stains and doodles are sprawled across its cover. Half of the pages fall out onto my lap as I open it, each covered from top to bottom with dates, times, and notes. The entries were made by volunteers over the decades, describing phone calls they had just taken. A teenager whose parents had kicked them out for dressing as the wrong gender. A lesbian terrified of having her baby taken away from her. A man arrested for chatting up another man in a public toilet. And a young person wanting to know how to come out. Sometimes the volunteers wrote to each other. In one entry, they are having an argument about a double-ended dildo. What secret time capsule have I opened? Whose lives am I peering down at? Who were all these people? I can barely catch my breath. Every single time-stamped note is a snapshot into the moment when a person reached out for help. I found a living, breathing diary of queer life, of all of its highs and lows across the country, across time. The oldest logbook dates to 1975, and the records continue until 2003. These books that are falling apart in my hands contain a communal, cacophonous voice made up of all the people who have called Switchboard, and all the volunteers, like me, who have turned up to the phone room to answer their calls. These boxes of books feel like a secret, a discovery, something censored that shouldn't be seen. Because why hadn't they been seen already? As I open up more and more boxes, further volumes keep appearing with more and more entries, some painfully lost to bad handwriting. The collection numbers 63 books in total. The pages are covered in traces of queer life. Volunteers have written in their reviews of gay bars, taped in flyers for political campaigns, and printed warnings of bomb threats sent to this building. They've even documented their rows, accusations from one volunteer to another about dodging the washing up, or leaving questionable stains on the bedsheets used on night shifts. I've heard that a lot. I read over these notes as if they had been left for me, a smile stretching across my face. So the rumours are true. There are countless untold, invaluable stories held in the pages of these logbooks, spanning 40 years of queer life in the UK. I had no idea about what people had gone through. I am a 28-year-old queer person who knows nothing of LGBTQ+ history and nothing of the history of this organisation I am a part of. And these boxes had been stuffed into a crawl space. I feel like I am the only one who can hear these stories, and everyone else should listen up. The logbooks are a unique archive, and I need to share them. I haul out another box of books and get to work.
June 16th, 1975. Caller says he has homosexual tendencies, no sexual experience at all. Guy was almost in tears about the whole situation. May 10th, 1997. Woman caller who dresses as a man, hopes to have sex change, but is attracted to gay men. Where can she go out? Men she is attracted to tend to go to men-only bars, clubs. Any ideas? Switchboard was a gang of misfits, a stack of folders and a Bakelite telephone with a curly cord. A couple of the misfits wore suits, but most of them were scruffy. They assembled in a small room above a bookshop in King's Cross, London, in 1974. The area was notorious as a den of depravity, inhabited by sex workers, homeless people, drug users, gays and lesbians, and radical left-wing activists. Number 5, Caledonian Road, the birthplace of Switchboard, was, on the ground floor, a radical oasis. A radical oasis named Housmans, a bookshop stocked high with socialist, anarchist, and progressive ideas behind a green and yellow shop sign. You haven't changed it. In the 1970s, the building opened other rooms for a rotating number of groups to use, each focused on a different movement: non-violence, peace, anti-militarism, animal rights, environmentalism, and what was then called gay liberation. This was a hot, frenetic movement. In the UK, from 1970 to 1973, a group of radical activists known as the Gay Liberation Front published a manifesto held weekly meetings of up to 300 people, disrupted Mary Whitehouse's religious conference, the Festival of Light, and co-organised the first Pride March. Their slogans included, "Gay is good," and the less snappy, "We demand the right to show affection in public." By 1974, they were burnt out from trying to start a revolution. And some of their members wanted to change the world by doing something quieter than endlessly protesting. Instead of shouting, they wanted to listen. "There were not very many people," said John Lindsay, one of the co-founders of Switchboard, casting his mind back half a century to the first night at Gay Switchboard. "Only a small group of us. John and the others were a group of comrades with a mission and a phone. Oh, it was just a fairly bare mess. I think there was a table, I think a settee. There were a couple of chairs. It was really only cardboard boxes. It's amazing. After 50 years, I still remember the phone number." Thank you.
Thank you both so much, and thanks for reading in such beautiful ways as well. So the first thing I kind of wanted to ask you both about is your kind of personal experiences and how that drew you into this project. What was it that drew you to the logbooks and to Switchboard kind of more generally? I know this is all kind of discussed in the book, but for those who haven't read the book, this is a really interesting kind of way into the text, I think.
Well, I first came across switchboards because there were many, many switchboards that popped up all across the UK for context in the 80s and 90s and later in the 70s. There's only a couple now, but I was at uni in Bristol and I saw an advert in Time Out asking for more women volunteers at the Bristol switchboard. And so I answered. I don't identify in that way now, but this was a long time ago. And so I answered, and I turned up one Tuesday evening and got given a massive folder, which the volunteer who ran Bristol Switchboard said, "Read that. If anyone rings, you don't know the answer, call London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard." I was like, "Okay, cool." I was like 19, and so I called Switchboard quite a lot. And when I moved to London, I knew that I had to try and join this wonderful organisation. And why was I drawn to it? It's so hard. I mean, I think I'm sure there's some volunteers here today. It's really hard to describe what draws you to volunteer at Switchboard. It's probably a mix of wanting to give back, but also I think you find out a lot about yourself in volunteering for the organisation, and it changes you. It changes everyone that goes through it. You go in at this angle and you come out like a prism at a different angle. And you learn so much about you. I mean, we talk a lot about what's driven us in this project, and half of the time you have no idea until you're halfway through it. But what's amazing about Switchboard and what it's done across the 50 years is that it's always there, answering the phones when people call, and that people keep calling. People need to keep being there to answer the calls. So I guess I was drawn to Switchboard because I wanted to listen and help people in a way I wish that I'd had someone help me when I was younger, I think. Probably quite a circuitous answer.
So I haven't volunteered at Switchboard, so my answer is more about the project, I guess. I guess when I was a teenager at school, I had a gay friend, and we talked about him and his issues. I didn't talk about mine. I went to university. I studied English. I didn't take the gay and lesbian literature module. Then I moved to London. I didn't go to gay spaces. I didn't know about Flare, or what would have been the LGBT Film Festival, probably back then when I moved here. I didn't go to Gay's the Word. I was busy working all of this time. I was busy studying at first and then working, and then and sort of like not engaging with like who I was as a sexual person, and also wasn't having sex during that time. And then when I was at 29, I did start having sex, and then I was like, okay, yeah, this is good actually. and so and it was gay sex for the avoidance of doubt. And so it was extra good, really, really, really good. And I was like, it kind of just, it changed everything in my life, and like really refracted who I was and how I thought of myself. And then I was, out. But then I carried on working in the jobs that I was doing for a few years. I worked in the media. I was a journalist and then a social media editor. And in that last job that I had as a social media editor, I was kind of, I was out at work, and I was kind of talking about that a little bit, and I could do some stories. I could do some work about LGBTQ plus issues, but it wasn't really my job. And then eventually I hit a savings target and I left. And I think that was as much a personal choice as it was a professional choice. And ever since then, which is now coming up to 7 years, I've basically made work about being about LGBTQ plus issues, whether it's me being that or other people. And so within that time period, actually, just as I was about to leave that job, I'd already given him my notice. Just at that, at the end of that job, I went to Bishopsgate Institute to a talk about the history of Switchboard, which I didn't know anything about. And it was about other LGBTQ plus history talks as well, all in one night. And Tash was giving a talk about Switchboard using the logbooks. And I was just like, boom, this is my project. And I need to go and tell this person, I'm Adam, and I think this needs to be a podcast, and can we work together, and can we be friends, please? So that was like 7 years ago.
Yeah.
7 years ago
Almost
this month.
today.
Yeah, because it was LGBT History Month. And so I was essentially like ripe and ready to find out about Switchboard and to make a project about it. So, and then it was there presented to me, and that's when we started working together.
So were you two kind of like born collaborators then? Was it more or less a kind of immediate
Yeah, I mean, that was immediately. We didn't know each other otherwise.
Yeah.
And it was very much, that was the first conversations that we had, and the first emails that we had with each other were a sort of courtship, a professional courtship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I was just gonna say it's weird because it's such a high risk move, isn't it? To just start working with someone. But I feel very lucky to have met Adam. Sometimes you just meet people where the way that your brains work really complement each other, and I think ours do.
And I think you see that in the writing as well. There's not, I mean, I don't know either of you, this is the first time I think we've all met, but like reading the book, I can tell, this is obviously Adam, this is obviously Tash, apart from bits where you obviously explicitly name yourselves, but even then I was like, it's like kind of your real kind of synthesis of two kind of minds, which is like really interesting, and has produced a really interesting book. And that kind of led me on to my kind of next question, actually, which is I wanted you to say a little bit about the process of kind of collating the logs, because this isn't just a kind of standard archival project in the sense that you're like, right, here's our logs, and you just kind of reproduce them in the book. It's quite an autobiographical piece of writing, and there's a bit that I really liked in that. I think on like the kind of first couple of pages, on page 2 you said that as part of your process you tried to fill in the gaps where the logbooks or Switchboard didn't capture a certain range of queer identities that we might understand today. And so I just wanted to kind of understand your process a little bit and how this book kind of came into its kind of current form, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Shall I start and then you follow? Yeah. If I miss things. Okay, so Adam bounded up to me that night in 7 years ago and said, let's make a podcast. So that was the beginning part of our project together. So I had spent 2 years reading the logbooks every Wednesday at Bishopsgate Institute. So Adam then went down to Bishopsgate and started to read them for himself. And we then collated the logbooks into themes. And the logbooks are quite, just to give you, if anyone hasn't seen a logbook entry, they're like these Adam read a couple then, but they're this amazing snapshot into a moment in time where a volunteer has put the phone down and they're writing it immediately. It's so rare that you get that kind of archival resource. Normally what you're doing is you're recording someone's memory. And that memory might have been a day ago, but it's not that moment. So it's this amazing insight into a specific moment in time. And they really are just astounding. And there's many to look at in the book. So do read them. But they're also these kind of little poems. And they tell such a story in so many few sentences. And each one that you read feels so personal and so specific. but there are so many just like it, which is quite amazing for our project and heartbreaking as well, to think about the numbers of people that were reaching out about those same issues. So to give you that context, I guess, to then explain that what we did was collate the most common themes. So like HIV and AIDS, I mean, the logbooks are absolutely 200,000 calls a year at its height around HIV and AIDS, right? So the logbooks are literally covered in those logbook entries. And so we would collate the different logbook entries into themes, and then we would use just a couple of them to demonstrate all of the stories that are there, anonymize them, make sure that the confidentiality was remained. And then we also interviewed people for the podcast. But with the book, what we got to do was to dive further, to interview more people, and also to look at what the logbook entries could help us say in the book with a different framing. So not just like we did in the podcast to go, okay, this is the 3 episodes on HIV and AIDS, is to take a step back and think about what can we say here about HIV and AIDS that feels different, and how can we connect that to care and try and present something about care in the community and our experience of care, or how the state didn't see us, or about sex and how good it feels to have sex as a queer person with the person that you want to have sex with, but in the body and the gender that feels right to you as well. And the book allowed us space to sort of dig in and dive into that. And then we wove through our own stories as well, because you can't separate yourself from your own history in this way. And every time we were reading the logbooks and diving into the logbook entries, I mean, I was struck by so many things. Number one, how many calls were so similar to the calls I was taking at that moment in time, but also how many of the calls seemed like me as well, and how little things had changed and how much things had changed. And so when you're looking at this kind of history, I'll pass over to you in a second, sorry, I'm going on a bit. When you're looking at this kind of history, especially when we're looking at histories of oppressed communities and communities that have been othered by society and by the state, and you are part of that community, it does this thing to you. It is an unraveling, and you can't not write in your experience to it, because that frames how you read this history and how you share that history, and it should frame it, and we should be the ones to tell it. But it would feel wrong, I think, to me, and I think both of us, to look back into this period of time and not talk about the impact of reading those logbook entries, being a queer person, finding your own history that was censored, taken from us, and then to talk about what was going on with you throughout all of that time as well. It kind of naturally became that, I think.
28th of February 2003, had a 1 hour and 10-minute call from a bisexual guy today who started off feeling full of shame and shy about expressing himself. 2003. So that's just an example of, this is a call from a bisexual guy. What this logbook entry alone doesn't tell you is that Switchboard, just around that time, 2003, the volunteers at Switchboard decided that that they would accept volunteers into their number who were bisexual. 2003, they didn't do that before then officially. You had to be gay or lesbian.
Officially.
Yeah,
there were lots of
obviously, yeah. And so, but we heard about that from volunteers that we interviewed. And we also know from other readings and other people that we know and whoever that there's a specific experience of bisexual erasure, and there's a whole politics and a sociology around that, and social attitudes and what was shifting and everything, and we're still living with that today. There's still a big problem there. So as much as we batched the logbook entries into these themes and said, well, here's a chunk of logbook entries that's about basically a person coming out, and that one would be included in there. We also used the other resources that we had when we were making the podcast, which is interviews with people reading that we knew and things like that, to do the thing that you said. I can't remember exactly the phrase, but like fill in the gaps there to add the context. And then when we started work on the book, so we'd done all of that for all the themes through the podcast over 3 years. And then when we started working on the book, we kind of had the opportunity to do a whole new layer of that, which, as Tash was explaining there, like put ourselves into it, as well as being the lens from us of being like, it was like we woke up from a fever dream having done the podcast, and we were like, whoa, why did we do all of that? Who were we? Why did we do that? Who were we? Why did we do that? Basically, like what is it about ourselves that we did all of that? So then that was how the book became its own project. Plus the other gaps that were filled by other archival sources that we didn't use in the podcast. Like we went to the National Archives and looked at state papers that happened in parallel to Switchboard. So it, I guess, accumulatively snowballing like use of different resources to add context and tell a richer story.
And just one more thing about the logbooks is that you only know what's written down, and the volunteer only writes down what the caller tells them. So when you're looking at how to be representative of lots of people's experiences, if a caller rang up and they had just come out and they were really sad, that's all that they would talk about. You might not know if they were able-bodied, you might not know what their race was, you might not know what religion maybe they had. And so that's also something that you have to hold in context with the logbooks and the archival records. And actually Richard Desmond, who was a volunteer at Switchboard for over 30 years, said that we only know what someone tells us. So it's really, really hard to sort of categorise what kind of calls and what stories you're telling unless someone's been explicit about it.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I've actually got a question I'm going to ask later on also about the way that Switchboard is kind of constantly kind of absorbing in new information and adapting in a way that was actually kind of admirable, actually, because there obviously were gaps in people's own experiences and lived experiences and so on, but they always seemed open to learning. There was never a moment where they go, oh no, that's too weird. There was some really weird stuff as well. It's like
toilet slaves.
Yeah, exactly. There was a bit that I really loved on page 41, which was, as Adam was growing up in Cleethorpes and Grimsby without knowing it, he probably passed places where men meet for sex. That is queer life. It is both ubiquitous and invisible at the same time. And I love the idea of this kind of parallel but discrete world, which is the gay world or the queer world, which kind of runs in tandem with what you could call the straight world, or if you're using Housmans' language, the hetero-patriarchal bourgeois world. And I was like, and then I made a note when I was reading the book. I was like, this is sort of like a ghost story, but in a good way, not in a really sad way, but in a kind of life-affirming way. And I was wondering if maybe this is just kind of peculiar to me, but I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on this kind of spectral quality of the book, of the work that you've done here, because it does feel like piecing together these kind of bits of, not necessarily transient, but quite kind of ghostly kind of bits of information to kind of create a picture of a world that has existed for a very long time. Does that make sense, or am I being a bit waffly?
I love that. I'll just say something really short because I've been talking a lot. I love the idea that we're living archives, and that so we are. Yeah, here we go. So our histories were not written down in textbooks, right? And so many of our queer histories are remembered through storytelling, like folklore, and through those oral histories, stories, and that's how they've been remembered. And what a story is someone telling someone else something about them. Maybe it's the way that they tell the story, maybe it's a note from the story, but as soon as you tell me your story and I hear it and I listen to you, then it lives on in me a little bit, and I'll share it with Adam, and then Adam will know a little bit of your story. And this is kind of what we wanted to do with the logbooks, is to record everyone that we spoke to and hear their memories, but also hear their memories of the people who aren't here, that lived on in them. And then we got to live with them a little bit, put them into the book so that when you now read it, they all now live on in you. And it's this idea of archives in a much more radical way, I think, than keeping them in a basement, in a perfectly controlled temperature room. We are actually archives, and we're constantly pushing and evolving and changing against each other. And if we do that, then we will never, ever, our history will never, ever be censored and hidden ever again. It lives on in us, and we are a radical act of archiving, I think. So I love that you got that like ghostly spectral edge to it.
Yeah, I think my answer to that is about the podcast as the choice of the form of a podcast. Like when I heard your talk and saw the images on the slideshow of like logbook entries, which is handwritten notes, I didn't think, well, I guess this is about me and my the skills that I had. Like, I didn't think, oh, this should be made into a movie, or this should be a painting, or poems or anything. I thought of it as a podcast. I had made podcasts before, not a documentary series like this, but I had worked with podcasting before, and I was a writer as well, but I didn't think of it as a book even. I heard it as a podcast, and I think it was because it's about phone calls, and phone calls are usually a one-to-one connection, and because it's just audio, it's ephemeral. It has that audio has that quality to it. Yeah, and so it felt just instinctively to me that this is a piece of work that should take the form of a podcast because of that, and because podcasts are quite ephemeral, and we listen to them like individually mostly, I think, and so it just was kind of self-evident to me that this would be a piece of work to take the form of a podcast. And the other thing to add to what Tash was saying about the Living Archives thing, about us sharing our stories, is obviously that's what the callers did and still do with Switchboard volunteers. And there's a realness to it. There's a manifesting of it when the volunteer writes a note about it, which is what we're using. But I also think there always remains this like ephemeralness to it because of that. And then the other big thing is that, because queer life is quite, lots of the things that we do or the way that we live our lives, the specific queerness of the way that we live our lives is quite ephemeral. Like it's kind of often hard to pin down. Like, yes, you can have an exhibit of a wedding ring to show about the case for gay marriage or something like that. But like, it's, that's really about like two people loving each other or two people fucking each other, which doesn't exist as well. So it like doesn't manifest. So anyway, I think there are physical records which are like records of men being arrested for having sex with each other and stuff like that, but also there's something about queer history which is always ephemeral. It's not written down, it's a feeling that we have, it's connections that we have between us, and there's a great quote that basically encapsulates this, which is by Soumaya, which I can't remember it exactly, but it's basically queer history is gossip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Read their books, Bad Language. It's amazing.
Read So's books. We've got most of them here, I think. But yeah, that's a really maybe gossip's a better word.
Yeah.
Like that's like that kind of oral kind of historicising. It's really good. I mean, my next question was kind of more boring than that, but it kind of came up when you were talking just then, Adam, which is did you find any kind of difficulty or anything from translating the podcast into the book? And also like working between those two different kind of media types, which is like the kind of new media of the podcast and the old media of like a bound book released by a kind of prestigious publisher.
We didn't know it was going to be Faber when we started working on it. That was great though.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, congratulations, Faber. It's a really cool, and it's a really beautiful book as well.
Yeah.
Which is the benefit of like, it's very orange.
I know, I'm wearing this. Yeah. I need to wear this on every event now.
Do.
But how was that process, and how so I'm going to be honest, I didn't know about the podcast series, and then I got sent the book by Faber for this event, and I read it, and then I listened to a bit of the podcast afterwards. So I'm probably one of the few people who read the book before going into the podcast. But how much of this would you say is the podcast, and how much of it is its own kind of independent entity?
I don't know about that. Probably out of if you think about the sources, if you think of us as historians, the sources that we used to make the book, probably 75-80% of the sources are ones that we used for the podcast, which is the logbook entries and the interviews that we did over the period of making the podcast. And then for the book, we then interviewed more people and we went to other archival sources, so that would get you to 100%. However, zoom out of that 100% and there's a whole other layer, which is like another 100%.
This is why Adam's a writer.
Which is the thing that's like more purely the book, which is this, basically running through it is this, like, I don't know what you call it, like memoir mixed with sociology analysis of like what it means to be a person born in 1984 and 1985, educated fully under Section 28 from 88 to 2003. And not just Section 28, but living in Britain through the 90s and noughties. Well, through the 80s, from mid 80s through the 90s and noughties at a time of quite high homophobia and transphobia in society, and like it being a political football, like what we'd now say like LGBTQ plus rights being an active political football in a way is right now with regard to trans rights specifically. And so there's that whole other layer to it, which is, and that was something that we really did a lot of work on when we were writing the book, was because that was going to be the framing of it. And I think that was the thing that energized us as writers, was that this was a whole new project. And it was a whole new project because we were adding this layer and we were pushing each other, and it's really beneficial to have a co-author to do this with, like pushing each other to say like, well, how did you feel when your parents said that to you about being gay or whatever? And like, let's put that in, you know, adding that whole other layer, and speaking to our family members, which we didn't do for the podcast. You know, we spoke to our family members and friends as well. So I don't know, someone can do the maths as to what percentage is from the podcast and what percentage is from the book, figuring that I've buggered up the maths. But
yeah, I really like the bit where your mum said that you used to bite people all the time when
Yes,
you were at nursery.
I
It's
did.
like, I'm sure there's something that for any Freudians in the room could probably like work out from that. So I'm kind of coming to the last.
I'm so excited for the Q&A now. Please.
Which kind of actually does lead me on to the next segment, which I've kind of got kind of a few like big lumps of text which are all about sex, because I wanted to, because there's lots of bits about sex, and I guess there's so much I wanted to go into. There was a whole like kind of politics that came out of the book around cruising, which I found like really interesting, and like you can't arrange a kind of literary event around a queer book without cruising becoming something that people want to talk about. And I kind of really love the way that this book kind of challenged kind of conventional ideas around cruising, which is obviously traditionally very much centered on the experiences of like cis gay men. And like there's a bit, Tash, where you talk about wanting to like kind of get like kind of a like lesbian kind of cruising scene going, or rather trying to find one that like already exists. And I made a note in my book, which is, have you ever met Joelle Taylor, the poet?
Yeah,
she's someone she knows all
Yeah.
about lesbian cruising. But it kind of like mapped onto the kind of the way that the book works as well, which is like the book is itself kind of cruising in like a weird way, like kind of glancing and looking at stuff. So this isn't really a question, really. Well, it sort of is a question, but I kind of want you to expand on it. Is like this idea of like cruising and like the kind of politics of sex generally. Were you surprised by the kind of sexual politics that you were discovering in the logs?
Yeah, okay. I love the idea as the book the book is cruising, like me and Adam as voyeurs. I think I always say this, but when I was reading the logbooks over those 2-year periods, I was like, my eyes were like proper cartoon popping out of my head. I was so into it. They are so sexy and angry and full of gossip. It felt amazing. But actually, you know what? I was part of Switchboard already, which I think is probably important to recognise. And when I did my training at Switchboard, one of my first training sessions was to sit among these people I just met and everyone name as many sex acts as they could. Like literally, like so many. Ice boxing, I can tell you all about that later. I learned so much and I was so struck by that that is kind of just what Switchboard's like. So when I read the logbooks, it was just a continuation of that. Or ironically, I was living a continuation of the logbooks. So it was really lovely to feel that connection. What I really enjoyed about the logbooks was the arguments and the way that the volunteers just continually call each other out constantly. There's an argument around cruising in the logbooks, which we talk about in the book, whether it's okay and acceptable. But I think one of the things, I mean, I speak about it in the book, and we spoke about it earlier, is this idea of absences as well, right? Like I started to feel myself getting angry reading the logbooks about the lack of logbook entries of, you know, people who weren't cis men having sex with cis men, and thinking about like, why was that? And surely this was happening, but why wasn't it happening in this way? And well, okay, we've got like sexism and we've got predators out there, and then it was amazing. I guess the logbooks and the way that we dove into them, and to then all the people that we spoke to, allowed us and both of us together and sort of have a lot of conversations, which gave space for anger. And I think that's one of the things that was different in the book, that in the podcast, So much of it was just, like obsessive reading, obsessive recording, that the book then gave me time to feel angry and to process that anger and understand where it came from. I feel like I've completely left the question behind. But do you want to talk about sex in the logbooks, Adam?
Yeah. Just thinking what to say. I think that because I didn't have sex until I was 29, and I had like pushed that down inside me, didn't kind of believe that I wanted sex, didn't believe that I would have it, etc. That like after that, I've been, well, first of all, now I'm a proud slut, but also like slut not just in like an actual sex physical sense, but in the sense of like learning about it and reading about it and hearing stories about it. Like I it's not my full occupation, but I don't have like I have almost a bottomless pit, as it were, for like people's stories, people's experiences, people's tastes, people's desires. You know, like it's a big thing that I'm interested in, and so who knows whether that will be satiated ever. But I think that sort of coming into the logbooks with that framing is like, wow, 70, how many books? 68? 63 logbooks. And almost on every page, there's going to be at least one call that someone's asking about sex. And so for me, that's like, you know, kid in a candy shop territory, right? 12th of January, 1976. Amazing, super, marvellous. A girl phoned. She's had her first sexual experience with another woman over the weekend, and it was super. She was so happy and so pleased that she wanted to tell someone about it. She was bubbling over. She just rang up Switchboard to tell them.
I got laid.
We love it. Back to cruising. 28th of October, 1975. A caller asked specifically for all-night cruising places. I told him, "Is this now okay? I don't intend to offer such info unless asked for it specifically, and will give warnings and respectable alternatives." That's the start of this debate in Switchboard about should we recommend cruising places? Are we undermining the safety of Switchboard? Because if the police know that we're telling people where to go for sex in parks, the police can come to us as accessories of unlawful sexual behaviour. And also we're sending people, men, to places that are dangerous. People are being mugged and attacked in those places, and gay bashed and queer bashed in those places. So there's this start of, and then there's a sexual politics within Switchboard of like, we absolutely should be, who else is going to help these men find sex if it's not us? Like, this is what we're here for. So that's a good, interesting one about sex and cruising. Yeah.
There was a really great bit where they have a meeting about giving sexual advice over the phone, and they come to the consensus that yes, we should give sexual advice and help people as much as we can, even if that means, and I'm quoting, pleasuring the odd wanker.
Yeah.
And I really like that, and I thought it was like really beautiful as well. It's like, well, you know, I like that they all agreed that. It was, did you, as authors, ever feel? I don't want to use the word voyeuristic because it has all these kind of horrible moral connotations to it that I dislike. But did you ever look through a log and feel like I shouldn't be seeing this, or this feels like I really am looking into the kind of pits of someone else's kind of despair, as it were? Or did you feel kind of like the project was so worth it that it kind of felt okay to look through this material?
I think that we are so when we were making the podcast, so this started when we were making the podcast, this kind of theme, this question, we set it up between ourselves, and we worked with a third producer, Shivani Dave, as well, and we kind of set our approach when we were handling those logbook entries within an ethical framework of, first of all, Switchboard has given Tash and me the permission to actually look at these logbook entries with certain conditions, you know, and accommodations, and so first of all we've got the permission, but it's like, it's not just like free reign, you know. This is a permission which is based on trust, and etc. And so we have to, you know, earn that trust, maintain that trust. And then I think just because of who we are and what our own politics are and our own experiences, and some of my experience specifically as a journalist helped with this a little bit in thinking through, you know, ethical, you know, I remember thinking through like classes that I'd had at journalism school about ethics, you know, and reporting ethics and stuff like that. And so, but yeah, we worked together to think about how to handle these and hold these, both just internally between ourselves, but also how we were going to place them in a project which was going to be a public project, and how then to contextualize them and how to treat them. And obviously there were things, really concrete things that had to be taken care of, like confidentiality and anonymity. But there is also this thing of like, yeah, this is a person in a crisis. This might be a person in a crisis moment. And so we had to look at things, and, you know, and we did it when Tash and I worked on the book. Each single one, almost like we're looking at, is this right that we're using this one? And there were plenty that we didn't, often because they're really complicated. Because some of the ones that we didn't are because they're really complicated stories. And it would take like a whole chapter to like really give the full context and explain that. And actually, that wasn't what our project was. Our project had to kind of cover more. So we used them quite shallowly in a way, and that was its own ethical choice to not go in too deep into them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you have anything to add?
Just yeah, no, I agree with everything Adam said, but also going back to like what I said at the beginning, one logbook entry represents so many stories, so it felt okay to tell that one story because it was so prevalent throughout the logbooks. And also we spoke to lots and lots of people who gave us their stories, and that is an amazing thing to have as part of this project, where, you know, we read logbook entries about the lesbians having custody battles of their children, and then we met Elaine, who went through a custody battle herself, and she gave us her story to record and be a part of the project. And I think the logbooks come to life because of the interviews that we've done, and because of all of those people, including Anson, who's at the front here, who shared their stories with us and let them be put into the book consensually as well. So I think the logbooks are like the kind of skeleton and spine of the book, of the project, and it's the people's stories that have been shared with us that are like the organs, the living blood and body of it. So yeah, it's a really good question that you asked that, and it took me back for a second, and I think I've come back around again to it in that, yeah, I feel like the stories, the logbooks come to life because of everyone that we've met who've lived them.
I've got another thing to add to that, which is you asked about, do we feel voyeuristic, and then you tried, Al, to not really use that word because you don't like it, and it has these moral quandaries inside it. But I guess I would say, like, speaking for myself anyway, like it is an act of voyeurism. I do feel somewhat voyeuristic, and I guess it's because it is. That's how I feel personally. When you're kind of listening to another person's story or reading a story in the logbook, like, it is an act of voyeurism. You're peeking into something. But the question is, how do you handle that? That is your essential position. But the question is, how do you handle that, and what is your intention with that? And for us, the intention, it always had to answer in the same way, which is like, is this doing the thing of what the project is trying to do, which is to, illuminate British queer history and like tell untold stories and show the breadth of human experience and show the horrors and the misery of social and structural and institutional homophobia, all these things. And the intention has to be that. So you have to say it's a balance. You're not out of jail for free ever. The point is, can you hold these things in balance and say, yes, this is my essential position, but am I on the balance of things doing the right thing? And then people can decide.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really good answer from both of you. Thank you. This is like brilliant. I've just got like one more question, and I'm going to kind of open things up, so to speak. Why? I'm going to phrase this in a way that I think it's really good that this book has come out now, where things are kind of, to say the least, getting a bit hairy again, for especially for transgender people in this country and in America, where things are getting just unbelievably kind of obscene for transgender people. But also, like, we are seeing like an increasing, as what everyone said would happen, we are seeing increasing homophobia and lesphobia as well. Do you think there's anything we can learn from the kind of the early days of Switchboard that we could take with us into the future, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think we've both got a lot to say about this, haven't we? Go on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild writing a history book and turning the radio on and feeling like it's 1987.
It is if you listen to the radio.
Yeah, sorry. I love it.
No, I love the radio too.
We love
That
the
was
radio.
a bad joke.
Yeah, and that was a really wild thing. You know, the Supreme Court ruling came out just as we'd finished the final draft in the book, and we managed to be able to get in a particular point that references that just before the final deadline passed. And that was in relation to a letter that we had found in the National Archives, an internal memo by the Met Police that stated in 94, I believe, I think 93, 94, if you come into contact with a transgender person, please respect the pronouns, gender, and name that they are using and that they are telling you. 1994, and we had just in the news seen a memo be released by the Met that said if you come into contact with a trans person, then a police officer of the gender that they were assigned, that is the same as what they were assigned at birth, must be used. It's the absolute opposite, which is just a wild thing to look at, 30 or so years difference. And it was just maddening doing this work and feeling like the patterns of Section 28 repeating itself around us. And why is this important? History is so important, and it's so important because we didn't know this history. I didn't know this history growing up. I didn't know about Section 28 growing up. So how the hell can I fight Section 28 take 2 if I didn't know take 1? And now I've learned this history and I've met all of these amazing people, some of them here tonight, who have lived and fought before, and now they stand behind me, and I feel that presence as I will stand and fight against the state and what the political parties are trying to use trans people as political ping pong to play their games. And it's not okay, and it's not right, and it's not fair, but what's fair anyway? But what this history does is allow us to know that we are community, and as Joelle Taylor says, collectivity is the antidote to social and cultural fascism. And it's true. And like, if I learn my history, I understand that collectivity, I understand that community that I am a part of, and I feel them all behind me right now in this fucking building, standing with me, and I'm stronger because of it. And that's something that they'll never be able to take away from us. And I said this the other day, but there's this poet called Robert Syken. He's an amazing queer poet. And he said, if you build anything on a graveyard, it is still a graveyard because everything has history. And that is really, really powerful. And if you know your history, then you can learn to fight and push for a better future. That isn't equality, that's equity. Because it's not about asking for what they have over there. It's about saying what we want and what we've always wanted. And just one final thing. What's so interesting about going back into queer history and looking at the 70s is fucking radical and amazing. And then you see the horrors of HIV and AIDS come and crash into our community and all of those that we lost. And then something happened where the queer rights movement moved towards gay marriage. And not that that's a bad thing to have, but it changed. And it's a whole thing that we've spoken a lot about. It changed because society was judging us and othering us, and things like Section 28 came in. And so the fight for gay marriage became more important maybe than the radical politics of the 70s, because we wanted to say to them, we're the same as you. We want the same things that you want. But where does that leave us now? Well, it leaves us looking at what we wanted in the 70s. And the more that we can learn about what we wanted back then we connect ourselves to that past. And I think that we can connect ourselves to a future that is ours, and it's ours to take. So that's what I hope this book will do.
I'm going to give you a round of applause for that.
I would, what they said, defo, but also my answer is about the lesson specifically from Switchboard. There's a reason why Switchboard is still here today, 50 years later. Well, there's several reasons, one of which is that, you know, queer phobia hasn't gone away, which is the bad reason. But the good reason is it's because at any given moment in time, Switchboard is a gang of misfits who disagree vocally about who they are and what how they should operate, about really what the challenges in society for queer people are, and they disagree about how to speak, what's the right language to use, what's the right policy for us to have, and yet they continually find a way to come together, to stay together, to hold those disagreements in the face of the shitstorm in the rest of society that's around them. And they're not doing that in a calm way. They're doing that in a really sort of like muscular and visceral wrestling way, as anyone who's been a volunteer at Switchboard will tell you. And it's clear in our book over the course of the history of Switchboard that it's a very, very like muscular, visceral disagreements that go on. And yet it's still here 50 years later. And anyone who's been in any kind of collective movement, whether it's a charity like Switchboard, which for 10 years was not a charity, it was not incorporated. There's reasons for that, because the British state said you're not worthy of being registered as a charity. So initially it wasn't a charity for 10 years. It's a group of people coming together. And whatever kind of collective organising you're in, whether it's party politics or campaigning or charity light work or arts collaborations, whatever, like I think for me that's a big lesson from the book. And it's a lesson that broadly the capital L left and broadly progressive movement needs to, fucking get his act together. Yeah. And
say the least. Yeah.
Yeah, and to know, and for individual groups to find a way to hold it together. And you're not going to agree, and that's okay. Yeah. You're not going to agree, and that's okay.
Yeah, I'm going to clap for that as well. Right, let's open things up then. So as I said at the beginning, if anyone's got any, it doesn't have to be a question for Tash and Adam, but if it is a question, that's absolutely great. If anyone's got any kind of personal reflections, either about Switchboard or from the time that we were talking about, that would also be brilliant. I'll come up and hand you the microphone. We'll maybe do like 2 or 3 questions and or statements at a time, depending on how long they are. So who wants to speak? Sorry, not to put everyone on the spot. Yeah, no pressure. Anyone? This happens at... brilliant. That was quicker than usual. There you go.
Hiya, great talk. Thank you so much for that. Potentially slightly selfish question. I work at the National Archives, so I'm very curious what records you looked at. I'm also aware I said selfish. Anyone can go look at them for free.
Yeah. We own them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, they're the public records. But yes, I guess any kind of sources that you used in general that you would recommend people to look at kind of firsthand?
Great.
Okay, so now I'm just thinking of what my Google Drive looks like, because all the folders are we've labelled them all. There are quite a few Home Office files, which in the National Archive system are HO and then a string of numbers and slashes and numbers, which pertain to policing the gay community. Those files include not just what we would call the gay community, but also includes trans people. It's where the report and quote that you mentioned, Tash, comes from. So it's interesting in the national records that they're kind of policing the gay community, and that's all together. So there's a bunch of Home Office files about that. There's quite a lot of Prime Minister's files, especially from the Tony Blair years that we used in the run-up to, the start of a discussion among ministers after 97, between, I don't remember which departments and Number 10, over whether to have some kind of consultation process about the rights that were being requested by trans people. And that led to a consultation. So there's all the kind of ministerial discussion and civil servants discussion about whether to have this consultation and what would the terms be and who to invite to it, etc. And then the process for how to use the results from that consultation to pass some kind of legislation, which in this case ended up being the Gender Recognition Act 2004. So there's a whole bunch of files around that. Age of consent was another file, which I think, sorry, it's not a file on age of consent, but it's also, it might be Home Office, but also Prime Minister's things through the 90s, Prime Minister's papers through the 90s, with John Major and then again Tony Blair. So again, papers about that. And then there's a census file that we used about, which was basically, about the census and about the pressure placed on the census makers and the chief statistician to include and to count gay and lesbian households, and cohabiting arrangements and parenting arrangements and those kinds of things. And then the final one that I'm thinking of is no, I've forgotten it.
The Charity Commission.
The Charity Commission, that was the other one.
So Yeah, Adam mentioned that Switchboard didn't get recognised as a charity for 10 years since it founded. And we found all of the letters from Switchboard volunteers, including one of the founders, David Seligman, whose photo is in here. He wasn't well enough for us to speak to him when we started the podcast, but he was still alive. He was a tie wearer, a sanctimonious tie wearer like me. And it was letters from him to the Charity Commission contesting why they wouldn't recognise the support of homosexual people as a valid charitable object. And then it was the conversations and the letters back from the Charity Commission discussing that, which are just really, really fascinating. But among all of these state records where you have the conversations that are within the state, you also have these letters from people writing to government in defence of what was effectively Tiny Tash and Tiny Adam's rights, all of our rights that we didn't know. So the census, there was a woman that we named Vicky who wrote in, basically had photocopied the census logo in the 90s, which was like a stick person that looked like a dad, a stick person that looked like a mum, and a stick child. And she photocopied it and then just annotated them with like lesbian mum, lesbian child, straight mum, straight dad, gay child, and like a combination of all of these, effectively saying, why aren't you counting us? We're here. What about us? What about these young people? And it was really amazing to read Vicky writing in defence of our rights when we were like, 6, 7, 8 years old. There was another person who wrote in defence again of gay rights, saying, when are you going to support us? When are you going to recognise our rights? When are you going to repeal Section 28? All of these sides of things. And yeah, it was lovely to see the people writing to government, and that the government kept these letters, which are kind of like protest letters.
But also the opposite. Plenty of people writing to government, and we read them saying, like, the homosexuals are getting too many rights. And, as my MP, you need to be stopping this, and you need to vote for this and this. And that reminded me of when, after my dad died, and I was in his email, and I found his emails with his MP where they were discussing my dad's support for the MP's support for like against gay marriage. The MP was against it. My dad was saying, I support you to be against it. So it just reminded me, like, there were these letters, to government ministers or to MPs that we found that were like against LGBT rights, basically. And my dad's inbox or outbox had those as well.
Just a very quick question. I remember one of the podcast episodes was about the raid on Gays the Word. And I was just thinking about like those times when there were a lot of police raids on organizations, and it made me think about whether the logbooks themselves were kept secretly, securely hidden somewhere. Like, what were the policies for ensuring that those were secure against the kind of impositions of the state?
Yeah, big fuck off door.
That's a really good question, and especially when Switchboard was here at Housmans. Housmans got was we heard in the intro, but because of all of the activity that's happening at Housmans, there are bomb threats happening here, IRA attacking here, police constantly coming to raid, and all of those sorts of things. On the door, Switchboard volunteers had a pasted letter that said what to do if a policeman turns up. Don't let them in. Ring David Offenbach, the one solicitor who supported Switchboard. But yeah, what did they do with the logbooks? The logbooks weren't put anywhere under lock and key. They were kept in the Switchboard phone room, which was open 24 hours for a very, very long time. But yeah, they weren't protected. But what's interesting is it reminds me of Cara Friend in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And they, on the other hand, hid their logbooks. And they were raided by the police, and the police didn't find the logbooks, and those logbooks did contain names of people and identifying details. And I think maybe that's a bit of a difference between the services that Switchboard here offered and the services that Cara Friend offered, that in the majority of cases you didn't, and the logbooks don't really have that many identifying details. When we talk about anonymizing them, it would be like Tash from Plymouth, who's 15, so it still would be quite hard to find them. But somewhere like Cara Friend in Belfast, which is also still going today, amazing organisation, did hide them, and because they hid them, they protected so many people. So it's a really good point. Yeah.
Any other questions or reflections? Yeah.
I think what you've done, the logbooks, is absolutely astonishing. I mean, I read it in 2 days, and it's just, we talk about it being like sort of a historical document. But in other ways, I think the way that you have woven your own lives into it actually make it a living document as well, because you've kind of brought all the concerns that people have. And you could be like, the elders, which I guess I fall under that, but I'd be kind of like, oh my God, shit. But what the joy and strife that they were going through is kind of paralleled with yourselves when you're going through, and you're very open with that. So there's kind of voyeurism from us as well, seeing your lives develop, and which you might not otherwise see. And I can just see that someone who's younger now will be sort of reading your stories and thinking, oh my God, yeah, these are the elders now, type thing. And I think it really does kind of like. It really made me think about my own history and stuff like that, which often doesn't happen. I mean, I don't have a heart, really. And I was reading this stuff, and this is absolutely amazing, and just really kind of I think it's something very special that you've done there. So more comment, really. On
Thank you, Anson is someone that we interviewed as well, so someone who very kindly shared their story with us. I did have my oral history taken recently for Exeter University, and the person who recorded me was 18 and said at the end, "It's been so nice to speak to one of my queer elders." And I was like, oh my God, when did this happen? But thank you for those reflections on it. It reminds me of, outside of this, Adam and I do lots of other... What are you laughing at? Oh, yeah. I know. She was very sweet. Outside of the project here that we've done, we have done several other projects, and they involve like taking archives and holding community workshops and speaking to people about their stories and their and all of our queer histories. And one of the things that I've just thought about it now is what you said, Anson, that we do in those that maybe is part of what we're doing in the book is saying, well, hey, look, I'm going to tell you something about me. And I'm going to trust you with my story so that maybe you'll feel able to share yours back, and sort of allow and stretch into that space. Like, okay, we'll take that first step forward and hopefully you'll follow us. And it will be a wider call to arms of listening and the importance of talking and sharing those stories and what it really feels like to be heard, I suppose.
I think what's the point of being queer if you don't bend space-time? Like, we're all babies and octogenarians at the same time. Like, that's the whole point of being queer.
Anyone else? I know there's a few people who want to say stuff. Yeah, okay, right at the back. Cool. Bear with me while I come to the back.
I was just wondering to ask each of you, is there one story from this entire project, which obviously you've been working on for so long, is there one story that just really stuck with you, that blew you away, that changed you, that you still think about?
Great question, impossible question. Thank you. Wow. All of them. But there was one person who meant a lot to me to meet, and that was someone called John Lindsay, who was the last surviving founder of Switchboard that we were able to speak to and get hold of. And I met him by accident. We have been working on an exhibition at the Barbican called Out and About with Bishopsgate, and I was giving a talk in the exhibition. And I came out, and outside of the exhibition was this man wearing shorts and a T-shirt that had been washed more times than you could imagine, full of softness. And he had a big grey beard and glasses that were literally on the verge of the tip of his nose. And he said, "Are you Tash?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm John Lindsay." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is John Lindsay, a living legend." And I was like, "Oh, wow, it's so great to meet you. Well, are you involved in this exhibition?" It's like, yes. He's like, "Well, I've got a bone to pick with you about it." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is so Switchboard." And so amazing. I'm being told off by one of the founders of this organisation. And in the exhibition, one of the cards had said London Gay Switchboard. And he impressed upon me in that moment the amount of work that he and the founders of Switchboard did to ensure that it was gay Switchboard, so that it would be under G in the phone directory. And they got it in the phone directory, under G for gay Switchboard. And that was amazing, and I loved being told off by him. And I said, I'd love to speak to you more. And he was like, oh, well, you know. And so he didn't trust phones anymore, the founder of a Helpline. And he gave me his email. And it was, you know, it took so long to be able to track him down properly. He checked his emails like once a month maybe, and said that he might be one day on a Thursday or a Saturday in the Barbican library, possibly around 12 to 3 or 5 if I wanted to maybe pop by. So anyway, I went down and he was there, and I found him there in the Barbican library, crouched over a computer researching homosexuality in the Renaissance. And I managed to record him. And I'm so glad that I did, because a year later he died. And he was there to see Switchboard turn 50. He came to Switchboard's party in March. It was the 4th of March, 2024. It was snowing outside and he was still wearing shorts. And he got to see the organisation that he started turn 50. And I went to his funeral, and there were not many people there, and it was very moving. And there was a point where people could stand up and share memories of John. And lots of people spoke about his how much of a socialist he was. He was a huge socialist. He was a librarian, quite a radical librarian, really, really prominent within the squatting scene in East London. And all of these wonderful stories were being shared. A woman shared a story about how John married her so she could stay in the country. She was gay. He was gay. It was really beautiful, but no one mentioned Switchboard. And so I hadn't been planning to, but I stood up and I was very, very, very nervous. I was also wearing shorts in memory of John. And I just explained to everyone that I was a part of Switchboard, and that I'd met John, and that I'd got to interview him, and that he had been one of the founders of Switchboard that started on the 4th of March, 1974. He had been in that room right there the moment the phone call rang for the very first time at 5:05 p.m. And 50 years later, Switchboard had taken 4 million calls, and he had started that. Someone who believed in the power of information. So for me, that was probably one of my most memorable moments from the book.
Wow. That's a hard one to follow. I think I have a different answer for this every day. Probably you do as well. But one of the ones that keeps coming up for me is connected to my thoughts and feelings and experiences about housing and the ability to build a home in the image that you want. And I feel quite consistently let down by the idea that I would be able to do that. You know, and there's generational economics stuff going on there. There's class stuff going on there, and all that. There's work. You know, I do the kind of work that's not kind of like whatever valued enough to be able to like have more housing choices. And this is a class and an economic issue. But it's also a queer issue as well, because of housing and who we live with and who we choose to live with, and the choices that we have about who we live with, like are really important. So there's a story in the book about a couple called Graham and Mark who were able to lie to the bank and get a mortgage on a big house that they couldn't afford with their own salaries even, but they knew that they could rent out the rooms to friends and build a kind of queer communal house, even though those two like took on the risk of the mortgage. But they could just lie, which you can't do anymore because of how it works. But there's also that, yeah, and I mean, I think that we write a bit about in the book about how in previous times it was, whether it's through squatting or things like that, and just generally the cost of housing relative to wages and stuff like that, that everything shifted quite a lot. And so this is like one of those things about like queer history, if we call it that, where things have, like the impulse is the same, but the circumstances have changed quite drastically and the politics of it are different. And so I think about that house that they built, and I'm sure that it was a fucking mess and a riot, and they argued and someone didn't feed the cat and all that stuff. But like, there's something about that and the intentionality of that really like lands with me, I guess, relative to my position. And yeah, so that's what I would say. I think there's something generational about that as well. So yeah.
All right, fantastic. Have we got any other questions? Anyone about? Okay, at the front again. Be right down. Oh, sorry, it's your umbrella.
I guess I should stand up. Just want to give you a compliment that you're not going to expect to hear. I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, United States, in a community of 175,000 people. In 1977, a group of people involved in psychology, actually, knowing of your switchboard here in London, formed a first, gay switchboard in Anchorage, Alaska. It has extant records that go back to 77. We live, my partner and I, husband now, in Northern Ireland, where we have gotten to know the founders of Carafriend. And to be here is quite an honor for me as the first executive director of that, what became a community center for LGBT and eventually T.
And for us to have you here as well.
Yeah,
quite the honor.
and it's so yes, there's a tremor in my voice because this is quite an arc to have lived in one lifetime, and to be with you is an honor. I need to say it that strongly. Activists across the world, and there's just one more thing I would say. Eugene he's Irish with his grands, and we were able to move here and have our marriage recognized here in this country as well. And because of it, I've been able to become a naturalized citizen. And it means a hell of a lot to me because we gave up our U.S. citizenship 5 years ago because of Mr. Trump's first presidency. And I guess that's something that I want to tell too. There's lots of good people still over there, and many who would desperately like to leave, and many who will desperately try to fight. Yeah. Minneapolis is where I have first cousins, and I have relations in Norway from grands that came to America, and knowing something about this country and how here we are tied to Northern Ireland, and you mentioned the IRA, and I quickly went to my phone and said, did they bomb here or something, there's just so much I just want to say that it means so much that you started this work. It had an effect. I can tell you lives that were shaped and saved in the place I lived because of your example, and thank you.
What was your name? What's your name? Jacob. And Eugene.
Thank you, Jacob and Eugene. That's very moving, and for sharing it. I want to take the circle even wider and tell you that Gay Switchboard here in London started because Dennis Lemon, the founder of Gay News, went to Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia saw that there was a gay switchboard happening there and was like, we have to do something like this. So actually, I'm just throwing it back at you over there. It's all going around. It's all one. It's all. But that's. I mean, it's amazing to have you here and to hear about what happened in Alaska and to hear that. You also know the founders of Carafriend and that amazing organisation, and then to be here and back and forth. But it is this community, right? And what we're doing here is finding those connections, and they're so strong when you find them and when you see them, and I just think really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Moving.
Yeah, I think my reflection on it is just that I think maybe all, but certainly a lot of queer people have this sense of connection because of being queer, which supersedes the connection to a nation. And I think that that's what we see time and time again with, cross-border relationships and migrations. And I think it is, to be queer is to be inherently fuck borders.
Yeah.
And I think we need that now just as much as we did in the 70s or before that. Yeah. So, and I think your story shows that too. So, yeah, pleasure to meet you.
I mean, that was really beautiful and be a wonderful way to end it. But if anyone else has anything else to add, I don't think so. All right, let's give everyone a massive round of applause. That was wonderful.
And thank you, Al, for chairing.
Oh, one more thing.